Okay, so again, welcome everyone, and particularly Anne, thank you so much for being here with us. And Anne has really dedicated her life to this topic of the feminine principle and the divine feminine. She was born in 1931 and is a historian and Jungian analyst. She has authored and co-authored 8 books, among them The Myth of the Goddess, which I'm reading at the moment, The Mystic Vision, The Divine Feminine, and The Dream of the Cosmos, A Quest for the Soul, which came out a few years ago. And I know several women on here are reading that at the moment. And in July 2023, she published messages from the transcendent dimension. And these were messages received by her mother from 1943 to 1968. And we can celebrate that in a couple weeks' time, her forthcoming book, The Divine Wisdom and the Holy Spirit, The Forgotten Feminine Face of God, will be coming out. And the ground of all of her work is a deep interest in the spiritual, mythological, shamanic, and artistic traditions of different cultures. And her 2 websites I'll put into the chat, and they're both devoted to a new vision of reality and the choice that lies beyond us as a species. So Anne, thank you again so much for being here with us. And we have 2 sessions with Anne. And in this first session, we supplicated her to speak about the history of the divine feminine and really helping us have a deeper sense of what are we talking about when we talk about the feminine principle. And I should say Lisette, who is also here, we had lunch in London a few months ago, and we're both sharing how inspired we were with Anne's work, and we both had a vision in mind that we would like to sit at her feet and learn from her. So this is the beginning of that. And Anne, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you again very much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and thank you for giving me this opportunity, because it's beautiful for me at this moment to be able to do this. So I would say to all of you that today is a very important day. It's a day of a lunar eclipse, an important lunar eclipse. And it's also, according to an American astrologer friend of mine, the end of Kali Yuga, which is extraordinary, the 2 coinciding today. So I think we must bear that in mind. So with that, I'll start. And as I say, this is about the history. Today is about the history of the divine feminine. And next time we'll more about how to integrate it into our lives. Now, 40 years ago, I had a dream of a cosmic woman, and that started me on my path because it was so extraordinary and so unusual. It was like a shocking awakening experience. Anyway, she was an enormous figure stretching between earth and heaven. I was lying flat on my back, caught in a great net, which was the net of incarnation, I think. And she had a huge revolving wheel in her abdomen. I had a small wheel in mine, but it was over to the left. And she indicated that I was to center my wheel. So for the last 50 years, that's what I've been doing, centering my wheel. I thought I would mention that because that's the ground of all the work that I'm going to tell you about today. There are 3 great mysteries: the mystery of the starry cosmos, the mystery of nature, and the mystery of our consciousness and its relationship with the eternal ground. As the Taoist understood, there are 2 primordial archetypal principles: the feminine and the masculine, yin and yang. These need to be in balance with each other if human society is to flourish. If one archetype is missing, debased, or devalued, society will become unstable and human creativity will wither. Over the last 4,000 years of the patriarchal era, the feminine archetype, personified by the goddess, has been devalued and forgotten. I'm reading it this way rather than from notes because it's easier for me, and I think for you as well, probably. Now, Henry Moore painted this beautiful picture in 1942, and I see it as an annunciation of the return of the feminine, or the divine feminine. It's called Crowd Looking Up at a Tied-Up Object. It is a very prosaic description, but it's obviously a feminine figure. It's obviously numinous. It's obviously archetypal, and the little crowd of people are looking up in awe at it. As our consciousness evolved, the sacred image was like an umbilical cord connecting us to the deep ground of life. Looking back over the past of the evolution of human consciousness, it seems to fall into three main phases. During the first phase that I call the lunar era, broadly defined as the Paleolithic and the Neolithic, humanity lived instinctively as the child of the Great Mother, in magical harmony with her body, creation, and knew life and death as two modes of her divine reality. Then this primordial experience began to fade as we gradually developed the capacity for self-awareness and reflective thought, and with this, the power to control the environment. In the second phase that I call the solar era, human consciousness became differentiated from the matrix of nature, and nature was imagined as a great dragon, something to be struggled against, defeated, controlled. I think you may remember many, many images of St. George and the Dragon. Goes back to way back to Babylonian mythology. It is now time to move into the third phase and a more developed kind of consciousness. During the solar era, the phase of separation, there was a shift of focus from the Great Mother to the Great Father, and a radical split between nature and spirit, dividing the oneness of life into a duality. The concept of a transcendent male creator God, formulated by male priesthoods, gradually became identified with spirit, with light, creative mind, and good, and the goddess with nature, matter, darkness, and chaos. For nearly 4,000 years in the three patriarchal religions that originated in the Middle East, there has been no sacred marriage between goddess and god, no feminine dimension to the Godhead to lend balance and wholeness to the concept of it. This loss of the divine feminine has endangered civilization and is reflected in the emphasis on conquest and the drive for power over nature that has become the ethos of modern culture. For many hundreds of years, in the fascination with the development of mind and the technological skills that have given us the power to control nature and the environment, the emphasis of Western civilization has been overwhelmingly focused on power, control, and conquest rather than relationship. Now, to balance this one-sided emphasis, the image of the divine feminine, together with the wisdom tradition that belongs to her, is returning to consciousness. She is reconnecting us to the forgotten inner dimension of the soul that has been shut away like the sleeping beauty behind a hedge of thorns. Yet, this division of life into two aspects is rooted in the dissociation within us between the conscious, rational mind and the deep instinctual matrix of soul. It is because of this dissociation within us that we have come to divide life into two aspects, spirit and nature, mind and matter. We need to recover the lost relationship with nature and with soul, and this may be one reason why the image of the divine feminine is returning now, initiating the third phase in the evolution of human consciousness, the phase of our reunion and return to the divine ground. So I've drawn this sort of diagram, which I hope will help, because we are living in the top yellow triangle there, and we don't know anything about what is below, the deep unconscious, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious, which has been Jung's work to really bring it to our attention. So this ego was important to our development, our evolution, but it's taken over as being the directive power in the psyche. And so I put self-awareness or the conscious mind. It's also come to be very much associated with left hemispheric thinking. Those of you who know the work of Ian, oh dear, I can't, it's gone now. It'll come back to me. Anyway,
McGilchrist.
Thank you very much, McGilchrist. He's written mammoth books on this subject, absolutely fascinating, about how the left hemisphere has driven out and silenced the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere is our connection to the heart and the soul. and is very much essential to our being, really. And it's got kind of sidelined by the power and great power of domination of the left hemisphere, wants to rule the roost. So I'm just giving you that as an image of what we have to reconnect with, to the matrix of the primordial soul, to the deeper aspect of ourself, if we're to survive as a species. Long ago in shamanic cultures, we knew how to communicate with the life of the earth, with the spirits of the plants, the water, the mountains, the animals, and with the life of the cosmos, the sun, the moon, and the stars in the night sky. Today, we have lost those skills and are increasingly losing the skill of communicating with each other, listening to each other. We have lost the ability to listen to the spirit of the depths, the voice of our primordial soul. It was Jung who gave us that phrase of the spirit of the depths. It's such a lovely phrase. So I'm now going to start with the lunar era and the great mother of the Paleolithic era. And here are three images of her. One dating to 25,000 BC, which came from a rock shelter in the Dordogne. And the middle one is in Austria. It's in the archaeological museum in Austria, called the goddess of, she's called the Great Mother of Willendorf. And finally, the goddess of Lespugue, also from the Dordogne, dating to 22,000 BCE. So you see how ancient these are, and yet how immensely eloquent, and how they speak to us still. Also, how beautiful the right-hand one is, how beautifully carved from mammoth ivory, and the left one from stone. And if you notice the left one, the lunar bison's horn in her hand was really connected with was growing in her womb. She's got her left hand on her womb. Her right hand is holding the lunar crescent. And the 10 months of lunar gestation before her child would be born. It's just such an eloquent and beautiful image. And Jules and I fell in love with it for the myth of the goddess. And we called her goddess, not Venus, not a Venus image, but a goddess image. So in this era, creation emerges from the womb of the Great Mother, who is worshipped as the ruler of the sky, the earth, and the waters beneath the earth. Life is an organic, living, and sacred whole. All forms of life participate in the web of life that is the life of the Great Mother. The Milky Way is the passageway by which souls enter and leave this world, and the shamanic journey into the other world is the spiritual experience throughout this long era. I should mention here very briefly Parmenides and Pythagoras, who knew how to make the shamanic journey into the other world. They came later, but they still knew how to do this, which was an extraordinary achievement. So the most important idea about this time is that there was no creator beyond creation, no separation between the Great Mother as source and the myriad forms of her life, no separation, therefore, between spirit and nature. The Great Mother was both the starry cosmos and all life on earth. The Great Mother ruled the three domains of sky, earth, and underworld. The bird, particularly the dove, was her messenger. The lion was her creative and destructive power and the guardian of her sanctuaries. And the serpent was her power to regenerate life. And that serpent goes all the way through to 623 BCE, where I'll come to later. Now, the lunar vision is the unity of all life. Just as the stars emerged each night from the darkness of the night sky, so the visible universe was born from the dark mystery of the invisible. Everything was infused with divinity because each and all were part of a living, breathing, connecting web of life, animated by spirit. The hidden dimension of spirit was present in every atom of the manifest world. People lived within a sacred cosmic order, the order of the Great Mother. And this, I believe, was the origin of the idea of the oneness of all creation, which is coming back to us now through quantum physics. So here I have this beautiful painting by Cecil Collins, who was a great friend of my husband and mine. And this hangs in my bedroom, and I look at it every day. And here you see the relationship between the goddess and the life of the earth, and the tree of life there on the left, and all the sheaves of wheat and the animals. Very beautiful image. Woman as maiden, mother, and crone was deeply associated with the phases of the lunar cycle, and also with the cyclical rhythm of the earth as it moved through the phases of the seasons. Everything was related. The lunar cycle was related to the earth cycle as it moved through the seasons. Woman was revered because, like the Great Mother, she brought new life out of herself. She was a co-creator with the Great Mother. She was the primary bearer and carer of life, as she still is now. I'll come back to that in my second talk. The moon was the inspiration of the greatest myths and rituals of ancient cultures, focused on the dying and resurrected god or goddess. In Sumer, we have the descent of the goddess Inanna into the underworld of our sister goddess, Ereshkigal. In Babylonia, we have Ishtar's search for her son Tammuz. Makes me cry. In Egypt, we have Isis's search for Osiris. In Anatolia and Rome, we have Kybeles' search for her son Attis. And in Greece, Demeter's search for Persephone. And finally, we have it in the Christian myth of Christ's death and resurrection. Now, these are all lunar myths, and it's very important to realize the importance of the influence of the moon on people's psychology at that time for many thousands of years. There was a time when the masculine and feminine were balanced and in harmony, and it was called the civilization of the goddess, or the civilization of old Europe, which existed amazingly from 6,500 BCE to 3,500. It was discovered and named by the Lithuanian archaeologist Marija Gumbutas, who was a wonderful woman, horribly maligned by all the male archaeologists, but finally redeemed I think it was quite recently, 2001, by the head of one of them, who was the head archaeologist, who said that she was right in her deductions of what she has made of where these people came from and what's destroyed them. So here I'm going to show you two rather inadequate maps. Here's a map of Eastern Europe. We have Bulgaria, Transylvania, Romania, Moldova, Hungary. We have Greece, and over to the left we have Italy, was all included in this. And it extended in this bigger map right up to the borders of current Russia today, and it included the whole of Ukraine in it, as well as going from Italy right through Ukraine. It was an immense area, and it was called the civilization of old Europe. And it produced the most beautiful artifacts, gold artifacts, and beautiful things, which I'm going to show you shortly. This Neolithic civilization, which extended eastwards from Italy and included the territory of Ukraine, was matrilineal, agricultural, and peaceful. Matrilineal does not mean matriarchal. It means passing the line down through the mother. Agricultural and peaceful. People lived in harmony with nature and worshipped the Great Mother. Everywhere there are thousands of little statues that Gimbutas found of the Great Mother. There is no evidence, she wrote, of conflict and territorial aggression or of defensive hill fortifications and lethal weapons. There are no burials of men with weapons. It was a highly creative and artistic civilization that left a strong cultural legacy in Southern Europe that we can still find traces of today. You may have noticed the beautiful embroidery that Ukrainian women do today. Probably that has its origin at this very distant time, and it's been passed down through the generations. So here are some beautiful images. This is an image of the Great Mother, who is also in the right-hand one, the bird goddess. You can see her pointed features, and also the necklace that she wore around her neck, always in both. And you see the door, which is the entry into her invisible realm, the labyrinth which leads from this world into the invisible world. It's a most fascinating image. which comes up later in the labyrinth of Chartres. It's the same journey we make when we die and when we come into being on this dimension. We go through this labyrinth, joining the two worlds. Look at the date, 5500 BCE, incredibly early. And here we have a circle of 31 figurines with 13 chairs or thrones, all feminine, seated on them, dated to 4700 BCE. There was an exhibition in Oxford about 8 years ago, I think, in the Ashmolean, which showed these wonderful images. I went to it with a friend, and I'll never forget it because it was absolutely mind-blowing. I think you can still find it on the internet if you look up the civilization of old Europe. And here we have one exquisite figurine back and front. You can see what consummate workmanship they had. Again, 4000 to 3900 BCE. And these magnificent and enormous pottery vases. I mean, as big as this, about 2 feet high and 2 feet wide. I couldn't get over the size of them, and also the beauty and the intricate design on them, so carefully done. I hope you're impressed by them. The peaceful agricultural civilization of old Europe was brought to an end by 3 successive incursions of patriarchal kurgan tribes from 3500 to 3000 BCE. These came down from the Russian steppes, of all places, in the corridor between the Black and Caspian Seas, bringing with them sky gods, the horse, weapons, and the war chariot. Europe was never to be the same again. They moved eastwards into the Middle East, Persia, Anatolia, and India over some 2000 years, taking their patriarchal culture with them wherever they went. The male was dominant, the female was his chattel, and the warrior was exalted and worshipped, as it were. So this was an utter tragedy to my way of thinking, because it changed everything. And we've inherited what was left. So I'm going to switch now to Egypt and to beautiful images of the goddess, because I think you probably already know them anyway, but I think it's lovely to go over them. So here we have the goddess Maat, who weighs the soul in the balance after it's deceased, and with a feather on one side. That's why she's got a feather on her head. And here we have Hathor, with the lunar horns and the solar disk between them, holding the sistrum, which was her instrument of healing. So beautiful. And here we have Isis and Horus, again with the lunar horns and the solar disk. This is the first image, so to speak, that led to the Madonna and Child of the Christian era. And here we have the Cretan priestess, I think. Beautiful images. And the Cretan civilization was the kind of southern tip of this civilization of old Europe. And it lasted a long time until the eruption of Thera put an end to it. But it was extraordinary, the beauty of it and the beauty of the artifacts and the palace of Knossos and everything connected with it. Another palace called Phaistos was equally marvelous. So unfortunately, the eruption destroyed almost everything except the few things that are left. And here we have the goddess Hera. And Hera was worshipped as the great mother long before the time that we know about Greece. There were great temples built to her on the Argos plain. If anybody from Greece is listening, they might be interested in that, because she was the great mother of the prehistoric Greece. And here we have Athena, glorious image from the first temple on the Acropolis, the archaic temple. And notice the serpents. Do you remember I said the serpent was one of the images associated with her? She has a crown of serpents, and serpents are edging her robe, and she's holding one in her hand. And here we have a magnificent statue of Artemis of Ephesus, one of which is in the Archaeological Museum in Naples, which is extraordinary. But do you notice her black face and hands and feet? And they relate to the dark phase of the moon. That's why she's a moon goddess. And she has the great lunar crescent on her chest. And beneath are all the breasts, which are her life-giving capacity, and lots of animals all over her body. And the crown of the city on her head. So imagine being the artist who made these. It's just utterly extraordinary that they had the ability, the genius, to create them with all the symbolism incorporated into that image. And here we have the temple of Artemis as what it looked like once upon a time at Ephesus. It was unfortunately destroyed, I think, by an earthquake. Apparently, the architect who built it didn't know how to get the pediment up to the top. And he had a dream that the goddess herself lifted it. And in the morning, it was there. Such a lovely story. But imagine the magnificence of that, and just standing in front of it. And inside would have been that great statue that I just showed you. For many thousands of years, the Great Mother and these great goddesses personified the principle of relationship, the interconnectedness of every aspect of life, and above all, the sacredness of the great web of life that connected nature and cosmos. In Egypt and Sumer, and later in Greece and Rome, women served as priestesses in the temples of the goddess. The essential relationship between heaven and earth was celebrated annually in the ceremony of the sacred marriage between goddess and god in the temples of Egypt and Sumer. I don't know whether it was celebrated in Greece as well. The patriarchal solar era, ruled by the image of the Great Father, is what we move into now, and that goes roughly from 2000 BCE right up to the present day. During the solar era, 4 powerful myths have directed Western civilization over some 2,500 years. These 4 myths have formed but also distorted our concept of reality because they've indoctrinated us with certain beliefs, leading to the crisis that we find ourselves in now. So first of all, we have the myth of God the Father creating the world, which is in the Old Testament. Beautiful painting. Then we have the myth of the fall of man, which goes back to 623 BCE when it was actually created. And in this myth, the image of deity is the Great Father. Divine immanence is lost. Divine immanence was what the goddess brought. The emphasis is on the transcendence of God or spirit. Earth becomes a place of exile and punishment for primordial sin. Man is given dominion over the earth, but he is no longer part of the divine order. He is exiled to a world contaminated by the fall and subject to sin, suffering, and death, introduced into the world by Eve. When you read my book, you'll know what I say about that myth. Then there's thirdly the myth of Jesus as the only Son of God, whose sacrificial death redeemed humanity from its sins. And this was created at the Council of Nicaea in 325 of the Christian era. And fourthly, we have the myth of scientific materialism or scientism, which says that we are the only conscious beings in a dead universe that is without intelligence, consciousness, meaning, or purpose. God and the soul are no more than residual superstitions. Consciousness originates in the neurons of the brain and therefore dies with the death of the physical body. There is no survival of the soul. What happened to the divine feminine? When, where, and how was the goddess deleted from the Godhead? So now I'm moving into a different phase. I'm taking you back to this reconstruction of the first temple in Jerusalem, which was built by Solomon in about 900 BCE. This is a reconstruction that I took from the internet. Notice the white tower at the end, because that's going to come into my book in the story of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And this is a quote from Dr. Margaret Barker, who's written an extraordinary series of books on the great goddess, really, and on what happened to her. She says this: in the most ancient tradition of Israel, Yahweh was both female and male, and it was they who together created the world. The consort of Yahweh was called Wisdom, the Queen of Heaven, the bright and radiant one whose teaching was like the light of the dawn. But Wisdom was abandoned by her husband. The Queen of Heaven was called Asherah or Ashrata. She was worshipped as divine wisdom and the Holy Spirit, and also as the tree of life, a wondrous tree that connected the invisible and visible worlds, whose fruit brought the gift of immortality. Her title was Mother of All Living. In 623 BCE, a group of priests called Deuteronomists took control of the temple in Jerusalem on the orders of a king called Josiah. They destroyed every vestige of the goddess Asherah, the Queen of Heaven, leaving Yahweh as the sole god. They destroyed the great bronze serpent in the temple and also her statue, and they destroyed all the little tiny statues of her, that there was nothing left. This was the beginning of monotheism, and this became the legacy of Judaism to Christianity. Christianity took over the image of the sole creator God from Judaism when it took on the Old Testament. All traces of the goddess and her association with wisdom were deleted, Dr. Barker says, from the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, with the exception of the book of Proverbs, whose beautiful words spoken by wisdom have come down to us today from a very early time, almost at the time of Solomon. The story of her violent expulsion can be read in the Old Testament, but it is rarely, if ever, recognized for what it is. The lady has been hidden, removed from the Bible by the ancient translators and the ancient editors, and then overlooked by the scholars. There are dozens of examples like this, not only in English translations of the Bible, but over many centuries. This is the story I shall tell, how the great lady became the lost lady. At the same time, the Deuteronomists created the myth of the fall, giving the title of the goddess, Mother of All Living, to Eve. Cheeky things. What a sacrilege. So the effects of this polarizing mythology, I've said, are that nature, body, and woman were downgraded in relation to spirit, mind, and man. Light and good were associated with spirit and the male. Darkness, and I haven't got the right word here, it isn't really suspicion and it's not evil, it's something in between, were associated with nature, matter, the body, and the female. And these all were downgraded in relation to the male and spirit and mind. Woman was named as a secondary and inferior creation in the book of Genesis 2 and became subject to man. Her ancient sacred role as Sibyl, priestess, shaman, and prophetess was effaced completely. Body was split off from mind, and mind from soul. And that was really the origin of the split in our own psyche between the conscious mind and the deep, aspect of ourselves, a soul. That's when it began. So I've drawn a sort of diagram here with Asherah crossed out, Yahweh left, spirit and heaven on the top with that huge red bar in between, and the umbilical cord between cut with that knife. And the result was monotheism and dualism and polarization, with nature and the earth split off from spirit and heaven, which they never should have been and never were before. With the loss of the Great Mother and the goddess, patriarchal civilization developed on the foundation of a fundamental dissociation between spirit and nature, creator and creation. The three monotheistic religions eliminated the divine feminine from their image of deity. All attention was focused on the worship of the transcendent divine Father, as it still is. This destroyed the sacredness of nature and the ancient shamanic ability to connect with the soul of the cosmos, like Pythagoras and Parmenides did. It also destroyed our ability to recognize the presence of spirit within the material world, opening the way to its exploitation. It was during this era that we lost touch with the sacred and with the voice of the soul or spirit of the depths. As we moved into the era of the monotheistic transcendent God of the patriarchal religions, the older shamanic relationship with the earth and a living cosmos was gradually lost, and with it the idea that the whole of nature was sacred, infused with divinity, ensouled. The priest replaced the shaman. The umbilical cord between spirit and nature was severed. The goddess had stood for millennia for the principle of relationship. Henceforth, relationships become increasingly fragmented, above all, our relationship with nature and the invisible dimension of the cosmos. The deeper layers of the soul, which held the memory of a life of participation in creation and the instinctual awareness of the unity of life governed by divine law, understood for thousands of years through the image of the goddess, were silenced. And this was when we began to lose touch with our primordial soul. Now here I've given an alchemical image of the reunion of the two aspects, the above and the below. But this, which I've just been speaking about, was when the above and the below became separated. So it's a wonderful image. I can't explain it now. You'll have to read my book, or The Dream of the Cosmos, because it's in that. Now, apart from the mystical Jewish teaching of Kabbalah, the only place the divine feminine survived was in alchemy, where she was called Sophia, or wisdom. Alchemists called themselves the sons of wisdom. And there she is in a beautiful peacock-covered robe with wings and a crown on her head, with a star above. And she's holding the red robe with which she's going to welcome the soul as emerged from the nigredo, the dark phase of alchemy. And she's welcoming with the red robe of the final phase, which is enlightenment in the Tibetan sense. So beautiful. That picture comes from a book called Splendor Solis. It was written in the 15th century and written by a man called, I'm not sure whether illustrated or written by a man called Trismosin. And it was done in Augsburg in Germany. It's a superb, superb book if you ever get a chance to look at it. Now, it also survived mysteriously and under the counter, so to speak, in the image of the Black Madonna, because the Black Madonna was the means of transmitting the wisdom tradition from Palestine to France. It came with Mary Magdalene when she came to France in 44 AD and lived there until she was 68, teaching there all the time. So the Black Madonna was really, I think, representing her teaching, which was the Essene wisdom teaching, which you'll learn about in my book. Now we come to the third myth, after the second myth being the, I can't remember now what the second myth. Anyway, it was the third myth is the Council of Nicaea and the creation of the myth of Jesus as the only Son of God, a thing that was directly contrary to his teaching. At this council, the Christian image of a Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit became wholly identified with the male gender. The creed was formulated that we say still today, and Jesus was declared to be the only Son of God. With the formulation of the male Trinity, the ancient connection between the Holy Spirit, divine wisdom, and the Divine Mother was for Western civilization tragically lost. Jesus' marriage to Mary Magdalene was erased. Henceforth, there would be no feminine element in the Godhead until 1950, when a papal bull declared the Virgin Mary to be assumed into heaven, body and soul. In 1954, a papal encyclical named her Queen of Heaven, thereby restoring to her the cosmic dimension held by the goddess in the great civilizations of the Bronze Age and by the Hebrew goddess Asherah. So she was, because to begin with, she wasn't a goddess, so to speak, but now she's been elevated to the Godhead. Maybe some of you don't know this, but I find it fascinating because Jung thought that this would mean that there would be a change of relationships between men and women, and there has been an extraordinary change of relationships in the last 50 years or so, or 70 years now. I thought that's interesting for you, perhaps, to know about. With the loss of the divine feminine, Western civilization developed on the foundation of a fundamental dissociation between spirit and nature, creator and creation. This dissociation destroyed the sacredness of nature and the ancient shamanic ability to connect with the soul of the cosmos. Belief replaced the shamanic ability to experience the sacred. This is something that we've lost. It also destroyed our ability to recognize the presence of spirit within the material world, opening the way to its exploitation. It was during this era of separation that we lost touch with what Jung called the spirit of the depths. So here we have the fourth myth of scientific materialism, or scientism again, saying that we're the only conscious beings in a dead universe that is without intelligence, consciousness, meaning, or purpose. God and the soul are no more than residual superstitions. Consciousness originates in the neurons of the brain and dies with the death of the physical body. So there is no survival of the soul, and indeed no existence of the soul. So I've really brought the image of the Cyclops, painted by Odilon Redon over 100 years ago now, but it absolutely encapsulates this consciousness which has no vision of the whole. There's the woman lying in nature, and there's the Cyclops with his one eye looking down over her. And I think it's such a brilliant image of scientific materialism with its one-eyed consciousness that only recognizes the material reality, has no awareness of the existence of an invisible reality at all. Extraordinary. So our one-eyed consciousness has led to this and to ever more devastating weapons of mass destruction, including biological weapons. But now I'm coming to the Great Awakening, which I think is beginning to happen now. I see signs of it all over the world. There are many people speaking up against war, many organizations for women, many meetings, many seminars, many people, many women teaching other women. So I think it's an extraordinary moment. The Sleeping Beauty is awakening, and she's an image of our soul. So you could say that our soul is at last beginning to awaken. And the hedge of thorns has been created by the four myths I've described, which have indoctrinated us with a false view of reality and of truth. We need to move beyond all of them to discover the truth about our existence on this planet. The fading of Christianity over the last 200 or 300 years has created a dangerous vacuum that has been filled by the beliefs of scientific materialism. And Edward Edinger, who was a Jungian, wrote this interesting passage. The breakdown of a central myth is like the shattering of a vessel containing a precious essence. Meaning is lost, and in its place, primitive and atavistic contents are reactivated. Differentiated values disappear and are replaced by the elemental motivations of power and pleasure, or else the individual is exposed to emptiness and despair. We see so much depression in our modern culture all over the world, not just in Europe and America, but it's reached really endemic proportions. And it's because we've lost touch with our soul. So this is a painting by my husband, which is showing the goddess holding a child in her arms, which is the new consciousness coming into being against the background of the tree of life. It took him 8 years to paint that picture. And I've called it the evolutionary imperative of our time to awaken to this new story, or a new story. This new story invites a totally different understanding of life, bringing with it more mature values which profoundly respect all forms of planetary and cosmic life, and a new unified worldview. Opening to the new story involves releasing ourselves from the power of the old ones. Now, this is a passage from Father Bede Griffiths talking to Andrew Harvey before he died. And he said, the whole human race has now come to the moment when everything is at stake, when a vast shift of consciousness will have to take place on a massive scale in all societies and religions for the world to survive. Unless human life becomes centered on the awareness of a transcendent reality that embraces all humanity and the whole universe, and at the same time transcends our present level of life and consciousness, there is little hope for us. Very few people dare to face how extreme and decisive the situation has now become. Very few people are prepared to look without illusion at our time and see it for what it is, a crucifixion on a worldwide scale of everything humanity has expected or trusted or believed in every level and in every arena. That's a very, very powerful statement. But he knew what he was talking about. He was a very great mystic and sage. After so many thousand years of existence on this planet, how do we create a new civilization? One that is based on relationship, love, and service, instead of the pursuit of power, and the deeply ingrained and addictive pattern of national rivalry, weapons, and war. I've used the word addictive because men have become addicted to this pattern. In their view, there will always have to be war. And somehow they have to be weaned off this addiction. And women may be able to help, I don't know, but there are many men who are thinking about these things now, very gifted, articulate men. There are 3 different aspects to the process of awakening to a new story. The first and most important is to know how and why the deep split between spirit and nature arose, and to reunite our conscious, rational mind with the feminine matrix of our soul. The second is to recover and redeem the feminine principle, understanding when, where, and how it was rejected, and why its recovery is essential to balance the present control of the planet by men who are possessed and driven by the will to power. The freeing of women in every culture from their long oppression and marginalization is an essential aspect of this recovery. We only have to think of the women of Afghanistan and Iran, and indeed those in any totalitarian system, and how they all need to be freed from this terrible oppression. And the third aspect is to define a new image of God, discarding the patriarchal image we've inherited of a male creator who's separate from creation, and becoming aware that we are cosmic beings, participants in and co-creators with the God we have been worshipping for thousands of years. Only when nature, matter, soul, and body, the 4 aspects of the feminine, are recognized as a manifestation of spirit, will we be able to heal our dangerously unbalanced and unconscious culture and create a new one worthy of the name. So here we have an alchemical image of killing the old king, which is killing the old image of deity, which the alchemists knew in the 17th century when this image was done, had to be done. So it's taken over 300 years to get to the point where we might consider this. So we need a new concept of God or spirit. God or spirit or divine mind, so long projected onto a transcendent male creator, remote from our world, is not something distant from us. Quantum physics shows us that we participate in a cosmic consciousness or intelligence, which is co-inherent with every atom of our being and every particle of matter. At the subatomic level, everything is connected to everything else. The entire creation, visible and invisible, is one life. Divinity is within us as well as all around us. Now, this is something that's been known by the great teachers in India for thousands of years, the teachers of India and Tibet, that there is only one life and that divinity is within us as well as all around us. The Upanishads are saying this over and over again so wonderfully. To injure the earth or to inflict pain, suffering, and death on other human beings is to injure the universal consciousness. And since we participate in that consciousness, to injure ourselves. Everything we do, say, or think affects the whole, whether negatively or positively. This is such a different conception of God and of ourselves that it takes some time to assimilate its implications. Some people may be horrified by it, other people may welcome it. The insight that divinity is present in every single atom of life is precisely what has been missing in our concept of God during the solar era. And it is this which has led to the split between spirit and nature, and ultimately to that between religion and science, as well as to our growing capacity to inflict destruction on each other and on the life of the planet. In splitting the atom and creating weapons of mass destruction, and in killing others who are our soul brothers and sisters, we are mutilating and desecrating the body of God. This is from Ukraine, but it equally could have been Gaza. The birthing of this vision asks us to relinquish many cherished beliefs and requires a fundamental transformation of our values. Our knowledge about the world and the universe is accelerating geometrically. We are overwhelmed with information about every aspect of what we observe. Yet we understand almost nothing about the mystery of why we are here and what the evolutionary role of our species on this planet might be. The Grail of the Feminine is urging us to open our heart to a new vision of reality, the revelation of all cosmic life as a divine unity. For those awakened to this vision, to be born a human being is not to be born into a fallen, flawed world of sin and illusion. It is to be born into a world lit by an invisible radiance, ensouled by divine presence, graced and sustained by incandescent light and love. 4 questions we need to ask and to answer. Who are we? Why are we here? Where do we come from? And where do we go when we die? Now, the Essenes and the Gnostics answered those 4 questions. And 2,000 years have gone by, and it's time that we answered them too. In this interlude between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, the long-lost image of the divine feminine is returning. She, the cornerstone that the builders rejected during the age of Pisces, is initiating a crucial new phase in our evolution, urging us to discover a new ethic of responsibility towards the planet, bringing us a new vision of the sacredness and unity of life. Wisdom, justice, beauty, harmony, love and compassion, and the impulse to help and to heal are the qualities that have traditionally been identified with the divine feminine. Yet she is also the irresistible power that destroys old forms and brings new ones into being, the inspiration of the love in action that is needed to transform a culture that is radically and dangerously out of touch with its soul. The divine feminine is the unseen dimension of soul, once named the anima mundi, to which we are connected through our instincts, our feelings, and the longing imagination of our heart. Soul is not limited to our own psychic life. Soul is invisible nature, the immense web of relationships that is concealed beneath the veil of matter. It is something inconceivable and immeasurable to which we belong, in which we live, an intermediate dimension between our physical world and the deep, unknowable ground of being. So I'm ending with this beautiful image of the cosmos, that we have come from and that we are returning to. The Essenes called us beings of light, and we're moving towards the light of the divine ground, which we carry within us all the time without knowing it. So thank you very much. I hope I haven't taken too long, but it was covering an awful lot of material. So now I will detach myself from my screen.
And thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's very helpful to have a historical perspective of both understanding through different lenses, what do we mean by the divine feminine, but also an understanding of the moments in which we lost that aspect of ourselves, that understanding and that perspective, and what was lost with that. I find that very helpful. And we have now half an hour for questions, potentially even more. Anne said she could stay longer if there are more questions. So if you'd like to turn on your microphones and ask a question, or if you feel shy or your microphone doesn't work, you can write in the chat and I will read your question for you. But over to you all.
May I ask a question?
Please, Elsie.
First, thank you so much. This is just so beautiful, affirming, and reinforcing the way that you've brought together so many of the different discussions that I've been following in science, in biology, in neuroscience, in philosophy, etc. I have a question about how to communicate this.
How what?
How to communicate it.
How to communicate, yeah.
And in particular, at a time when ears are just so hypersensitive to, because of the quote unquote culture wars. I'm here in New York City and it's challenging. I won't go into detail on that, except to say that terminology that we use has been weaponized.
It has, yeah, quite right.
The word woman has been weaponized. The word feminine has been weaponized. And yet, every rational aspect of us knows that we live in a living system and we've been imposing mechanistic processes on it that are not working anymore. And that relational skills and capabilities are what are called for. So when we use words like collaboration, harmony, cooperation, relationality, I think that we can be heard, and it is heard. My sphere of operation is business strategy. But the word feminine is a trigger. So when we talk about the divine feminine, men get up in arms. When we talk about feminine values, I find, there's that reaction. So how do we talk about this? How do we talk about this in a way that is part of the, I think you said they need to be weaned off the old patriarchal mindset. I think you might have used the word weaned. How do we use language that is not triggering a closed heart?
I think you have to ask for guidance when you're doing this. I know that we live in a culture which is censoring everything, which has become almost, again, an indoctrination, this censorship. It's conditioning people to accept censorship as part of the natural order of things, which it isn't at all. So I think that introduce the idea of the heart. When you come in a group of men, to try and connect with their hearts rather than their heads. That's one technique that can be used. What do you feel about this? What is your feeling about this word? Why does it bother you? Why do you consider it to be redundant or threatening? You can ask questions like that, and there will be resistance because people have become so stuck in a mechanistic way of thinking, that they can't think outside the box. That's what Ian McGilchrist is getting at all the time, that they're conditioned through the left hemisphere only to see things in a certain way. But I think that we are guided. I've been guided throughout my life, first of all, to do what I had to do, get educated, train as a Jungian analyst, write books, and finally write this final book in which I can put everything that I know into it and everything that has to be changed into it. So I've been guided, and I know that if we ask for guidance in these different instances of how to handle this situation, I think it will come just in a moment of inspiration. And you can say, throw up your hands, I don't know how to talk about this because it's such a block. There's such resistance, even to the idea of woman. The very word woman in our National Health Service in England, they can't use it anymore. They use, instead of breastfeeding, they say chest feeding. You know, they've absolutely adulterated the language, which Sophie will know about, I'm sure. It's absolutely disgraceful. And it's been the influence, I'm afraid, of the transgender community, who have a huge will to power and will not let it go, so to speak. And because of that, everything has become so sensitive that people don't dare to think. So it's a very good question, but I can't answer it for you. You have to find your way through the hedge of thorns.
I find it very helpful that you started with a reminder to ask for guidance. Thank you so much.
I think it's the best thing. Thank you.
I have a question, if I may. You very briefly mentioned the Cathedral of Chartres. And of course, Jim Garrison is traveling there every year because he says it's one of the most important places for the divine feminine. How do you think, is it energetically, is it a labyrinth, or is there also a story that's being told?
Yeah, there is.
On the facade of Chartres? And how about Mary Magdalene? Can you say something about it?
Yes, I can. It's in my book. There's a whole section on that very thing, because Chartres was created by people who knew the truth, not by people who were simply masons or architects. They possibly went to the Holy Land. So the Knights Templars went to the Holy Land and spent 5 or 10 years there, I think. And they must have come in contact with people there, perhaps the Sufis, who taught them things that they hadn't known before. And they came back with that knowledge, and they began to build a series of great cathedrals. And the Knights Templar did. They financed the cathedrals. And they built it as a shrine to the divine feminine, not only to the Virgin, but also to Mary Magdalene secretly. That was what was part of the thing inside. But every stone of Chartres Cathedral, you can't go into it without bursting into tears. I would advise everybody to go at least once in their lifetime to that incredible place. And the labyrinth, there used to be labyrinths in every cathedral, because I think they built 11 Gothic cathedrals in the space of a very short time, 50 years or something like that. And they were in the shape of Virgo, the constellation Virgo in the north of France. So there was a great wisdom and teaching in that. And it had the alchemical wisdom incorporated into the images and the way that the cathedral was built, and even the 2 towers. And I mean, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but it was really a rebuilding of that lost temple in Jerusalem. It was a recreation of the sacred shrine of the divine feminine. And that, I think, is very important to know. And also that the people who built it were initiates. They weren't just any old architects. They were initiates of the secret wisdom tradition. And they'd been trained for a long time. And when you think of the huge effort that went into it, the thousands of actual workmen who worked on it for 25 years to build it, and when you think they brought Sufi workmen to come and do the blue stained glass in Chartres. So there was certainly the Sufi element included there. And that, I mean, who persuaded the Sufis to come to Chartres? Who lodged them and gave them food every day? Who talked to them? You know, all those sort of things interest me. What were the human relations between all those people working on the same building and the people dragging huge chariots of stone to the cathedral every day for years and years and years? I mean, it was a mammoth undertaking. So does that give you a little more information?
Yes, it
It's so
does.
lovely to see you, Esther. Your name
I'm
isn't
so happy to
correct
see
on
you.
the, I
Yeah.
thought it was you. How lovely to see you.
Yes, I have one more question, and that's about the fourth question. Normally we ask where we come from, who we are, and where we go to. And you add what is after death. And I'm walking the labyrinth in Chartres. How does that open up the connection between life and death in that sense?
I think it opens up the connection between our dimension and the inner dimension, which is part of the path that we will walk, like that image of the very early Great Mother with the labyrinth inside her body. That's the same labyrinth, the same image, and it has the rose as its center,
Yeah.
which is echoing the rose windows above of the south transept of the west transept, I think it is. Anyway, that walking that labyrinth is really taking that journey into the inner dimension. We don't die when we die. Our consciousness survives. So in walking the labyrinth, we're doing what we will do after death, so to speak, although we wouldn't necessarily walk the path, but we will what's the word? Not transformed.
Mutated?
In a new place. I mean, taken from one place to another. I can't think of the right word.
Worded.
Transported is the word. Transported into this other dimension that we don't know about at the moment. But there are thousands and thousands of people over the other side who are helping us with this work that we've got to do now, and can be called upon to help. As I call when I'm doing my writing, I say, please help, I need help with this paragraph or whatever. And they always help. And so we have to keep the consciousness of both dimensions in our mind when whatever work we're doing. Realize that it's there, right there with us, next door to us. We can't see it because of the vibrational level is different between the two dimensions. It's to do with the lower vibration of our planet in relation to the higher vibration of the higher realities. So thank you, Esther, so much for that question, and those questions rather. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lisette. Hello, Anne. I so want to thank you for making this time, but mostly for all of the work you have done and all of the things you have uncovered for all of us. I'm really happy to sit in this circle with you. And I was noticing when you read, the four myths of the masculine, how painful it is, even when you read those words, how that separation is so painful. And I'm really happy to hear you speak about, your sense of hope, because I'm also seeing the masculine in a kind of maybe final fight for utter domination and, destruction of all that all that lives the unity. And I was curious also whether you'd want to speak about, because you mentioned Ukraine in the time of the the lived
Old Europe.
oneness of all, and then the forces coming from Russia, and it's like, whoa, that was then and this is now, and did you do that on purpose? And could you maybe speak a bit more about, because it gives me a very different perspective on what is happening there and why Ukraine is fighting also so bravely.
Well, it just happens that they did come down from the Russian steppes in that time, in the gap between the Black and the Caspian Seas. And what is happening now, I mean, Russia did invade Ukraine, but Russia has considered, like Putin does, Ukraine as part of itself, and that's the problem. It cannot admit that Ukraine is a separate country.
Yeah.
But it may be repeating a pattern of 3,500 BC. One doesn't know. it's so extraordinary because we do repeat patterns over and over again in our own lives sometimes, as well as in the collective life. So, but I do think there's a very great danger now of something called transhumanism. I've got a whole chapter of it in my book, because that is the next phase of the patriarchal controlling everybody that is in the wings, as it were, and which is already starting with the adulation of AI. So we just have to be careful of what's happening. We have to fight tooth and nail against any infringement of our right to communicate with each other. That's something that's very important to keep open, the lines of communication all over the world, because we have totalitarian systems in China, in North Korea, in Iran, in Afghanistan, dreadful examples, really. The Chinese have forgotten their ancient Taoist wisdom. It doesn't enter into their thinking at all. And yet there's a greatness in China that is there and may come through in another form if we just wait more patiently for it to come through. One should never dismiss China because it's got such ancient roots that it is a most extraordinary country. So I just say we just have to have courage and hope and educate our children and our grandchildren to free them from all the indoctrinations they've received and get them to live their life as free human beings, happy to have life flowing through them, happy to have their creative gifts, whatever they might be, not feel compelled to be anything, which unfortunately has entered into the universities now and has really polluted the atmosphere of academia. It's very sad that young people are no longer able to speak what they feel and think. They have to belong to a group and they have to be indoctrinated into ideologies. And that is tragic because it goes against the whole origin of universities and the meaning of being in the 3 years in university. But for me, when I was at Oxford in 1950 or 51, there was something called logical positivism in those days, which was a kind of materialist philosophy. Someone called Frederick Ayre, A-Y-R-E, was head of it. And I remember thinking then, oh, what is this? I don't understand what they're going on about. So it's the same thing, scientific materialism in a previous incarnation. Quite funny when I think back to it. And there was I writing about the Cathars already, even then in the university, in quite a different mindset. Anyway, thank you for your question and continue to have hope.
Good, thank you.
And thank you. Oh, sorry, Daniela, we're overlapping. I'll ask one quick question. I'm really curious, and thank you very much, first of all, for this presentation. Very enriching, and the imagery, it's so evocative and really touching. You said before we need to fight tooth and nail, and I'm really curious about this, and I'm wondering whether you could deepen into this a little bit. What I'm sitting with is the question of how we can bring balance to the masculine and the feminine, so we can have a healthy expression, a healthy balance in the psyche, rather than these extreme pendulum swings that are happening from the feminine to the masculine, and then to expressions of the feminine that may not be healthy, but that are coming with this fighting, furious energy because of all the oppression, but which may in themselves begin triggering a kind of polarizing response in the masculine, where men are up in arms, feeling threatened by women. So I'm really curious what you make of that and what you feel would be a healthy response to bring greater balance. Thank you.
Well, it's an enormously difficult question, which I can't really answer because we have to live it in our own individual lives, doing what we can in the context of our lives to find a way through this labyrinth of opposition and difficulty and censorship, huge censorship during COVID, for instance, by governments. So we are in a censored culture already, and I think one just has to open people's eyes to it and say, is this the way we want to live our lives? Is there another way of living them when we're not at each other's throats? Is there some language we could formulate that would join people together rather than setting them apart? I think you have to do it, as I said, through your own guidance, your own inner guidance in the context of whatever you're doing, your work. I've been lucky in a way because I've been able to do it through my writing. I haven't been in the marketplace. I haven't had to struggle to earn my living in the marketplace. I've had a very privileged, protected background in which I could write all these books. So it's almost impossible for me to give you advice, except to say this is a difficult crisis period. This lunar eclipse is meant to change things. It's meant to mark the end of an era, the end of Kali Yuga, and the beginning of a new era. And we are entering into a new age, the age of Aquarius, which is the age of the outpouring of the waters of wisdom, really. And it's also the age of the Holy Spirit, the age of the feminine. But if you say that to men, they'll run a mile. And even some women will run a mile too. So you just have to gauge your audience and say what I've just said. Say this will make you run a mile. But I have to say it nevertheless, and say it with humor. Humor is terribly important. If you can bring that into your conversations and say, I know that this will send you running for the hills, but nevertheless, I think I have to say it, that sort of thing. And if you have a smile and a humorous voice, they will be able to take it. If you put it in a didactic way, they will not take anything at all.
Thank
Okay?
you for that. Yes, appreciated. Thank
All
you.
right.
Hi.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. And Sophie, thank you so much for bringing Anne here, and everyone for showing up today. I feel so grateful. I appreciate your question, Jessica. I feel the same way. I teach in these linear work in universities, and yeah, there's a lot right now. I feel, oh, we just need to fight harder. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not what we need to do, right? to shift this. And on the other side, I see like that the power of the mother of, like, when I heard you say fight, it was like about transhumanism. It's like to me, it's like a defense and a barrier and a no, like a boundary, right? A strong boundary, right? And so figuring out when to cancel this this Cold War of just like, we're gonna fight harder. No, it's a shift in how we show up. And so, I really appreciated Elsie, is that how you say your name? Elsie's question earlier. Because I work in these really, places where bringing up the feminine is a difficult thing to do. And I so appreciate what you just said, Anne, about we just have to do it anyway. And one of my questions, or one of the things I'm looking at, is that I feel like there's these patterns. There's like it's time to remember the divine feminine, right? And it's time. You have a whole indigenous women-led movement called rematriation, right? Of reconnecting us to our indigeneity and how we connected to the earth. And they find each other, and the divine feminine people find each other. And the people that are not using any of those names, but talking about conscious leadership, find each other. And so my question is, like, how do we, I'm interested in this conversation of what does it look like to kind of, you talked about quantum, scientists talk, like there's that bridge there, right? Of like, this step of like, how do we bridge the divine feminine into those conversations? And I feel like you probably answered this to the extent that you can, but if you have any other guidance there of like, what does it look like to kind of widen that hoop so that we're not just in these little fiefdoms of these are the divine feminines and these are the rematriations and these are the conscious leaderships, right? We're all trying to do the same thing, which is reconnect humanity to the way that is an old way. It's a new way in a modern world, but it's an old way of connecting to ourselves, our consciousness, each other, and the planet. And so just any guidance on that in terms of thinking about bridging of those conversations.
I think that, again, you have to do it in the context of your own life. I don't know exactly what you're engaged in or where you are, but if you can sort of say to people, where do we go from here? Are we going to go on this path of ever more technology? Or are we going to reconnect with nature in a better sort of way? And what about learning from the indigenous people like Chief Phil Lane, for instance, who understands everything that I've been talking about? There are remarkable people in the indigenous community who could teach us a great deal. So that's one aspect. But I think that you have to ask, where have we got to? There's no limit to what men will do because they're fascinated by technology. There's no break that will be there. They'll always say, oh, let's just try this and see whether it works. And it might do this for us and it might do that for us. And so we have to try it because it's in our blood and our genes to try new things, and particularly new technology is fascinating. So with chatbot, what can we do with chatbot? Well, you might ask chatbot a question. That question, what shall we do? And see what it says. Because actually, sometimes it can give quite wise answers. I've heard that once or twice, if you frame it in the correct way. So there are just many avenues that you can take. There are any number of organizations now in the world gathering women together, also teaching men how to connect with their feminine side, which has been completely obliterated through emphasis on the left hemisphere of the brain, and cutting out the heart altogether. There's an institute in America called Heart Math, which you might connect with in order to teach people you're teaching how to connect with their heart. That is something I would recommend very strongly because it's a wonderful organization. And they've discovered that people can actually read books from the heart without actually seeing the text with their physical eyes. That's a new discovery they've just made with a little girl who was able to read the book in front of her with a blindfold. So there are interesting discoveries going on, and that you could use that as a method of getting to people because they have good diagrams of how to connect with your heart, how every day to go into your heart and ask what it's feeling, sort of thing, and how send blessings out into the world. And it's a good recipe for getting into people's hearts rather than into their heads where they will block everything because they're in the left hemisphere and the left hemisphere doesn't want to know anything different from what it already knows.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, I hope that helps.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And there's a question in the chat from wonderful Diane Dane, who's doing really wonderful work as well. And she doesn't have good service. So she said, would you ask Anne what is the one thing she would like to see all the women do to make progress on this feminine return? What is the one thing you would like to see all women do to make progress on this?
Well, first of all, to value themselves as carriers of life and as carriers of this wisdom which has been lost, with soul wisdom. They don't actually so much have to do so much as they have to be conscious of what they are. I think I would say that. It's called Heart Math, that institute. Heart Math, it's in California. It's got a hyphen, heart-math. So, I mean, this is a huge question, which I can't really answer. I've answered it for myself. But I see that how fragile women are, how unsure of themselves, how battered they are by the school and the Facebook issues that they engage with in school. You have to protect your daughters somehow from being, contaminated by what's going on in schools and what boys are looking at on the internet and pornography. It's a huge question. And so I would say protect the feminine wherever you can, protect your little girls, protect your boys from pornography, and assert the values of the feminine, which are love and compassion and harmony, wisdom and justice, those 4 or 5 qualities. Teach people about them, ask them questions. What do you know about harmony? What do you know about wisdom? What do you know about service? You're in the left hemisphere, you're trying to lay down the law about this, that, and the other, but what do you actually know? So I think it's terribly important. I mean, in this country now, there's a great drop in the birth rate for many different reasons. One, the midwifery services are appalling. Two, there's no preschool, young schooling, nurseries that people can afford. Three, the cost of living is so high that they can't afford children. So this is very sad. And this is happening on a wide scale throughout Europe, in fact, the lowering of the birth rate. And also, we're told that we have to reduce the population of the planet in order to save it. But I don't think we have to do it quite so drastically as that. And I don't think we have to do it through eliminating large numbers of us, as happened with COVID. I think that we have to do it in a wiser kind of way and come together to formulate the wiser way of doing this and of nurturing women. Apparently in Poland, they have wonderful nurseries that people can afford. So young people are leaving this country, the UK, to go to Poland in order to raise their families. This is tragic because it will happen all over Europe. Maybe Esther knows about it in the Netherlands, whether it's happening there. But I can't really answer that question. It's too big.
And there's another comment and question in the chat from Liette. It says, Dear Anne, I'm so grateful for being in this circle. I can't speak because my tears are flowing throughout our gathering. Tears of pain and sadness from a deep remembering, I think, and tears of joy and hope for what is emerging. I imagine you have these feelings too. And the question is, how do you heal?
Well, you heal by recognizing the pain. That's one of the methods. Healing anything in a trauma, the trauma needs to be recognized and experienced through feeling, and then gradually, not exactly dissolved, but soothed into a harmonic state. People, all these traumas that have been created through these thousands of years, there have been horrific traumas that people have had to go through, and they're all held in the collective psyche still. And we repeat the traumas over and over again in our addiction to war. I mean, look at Gaza and what it's created there for people. And look at the trauma in the Jewish psyche that suffered so much in Germany and that carries these wounds still and has the desire for revenge at any threat that comes at it, so to speak. So they're deep, deep wounds that are activated still in our political life and need to be recognized, wept over, because you need to cry really with empathy with those wounds, and then say, how can I transform that stuck energy, as it were, into new creativity? How can I express what I'm feeling in a new form, which will bring joy to people and joy to myself as well? I think that it's the effort of transformation and transfiguration in the alchemical sense that you have to do with these old ancient wounds that we carry. And women in particular carry them because men are not so aware of their feelings. In fact, they're not aware of their feelings at all, mostly. But they are beginning to be. There are men speaking out now about their feelings, particularly their experiences in childhood. And so I think that there's scope there, but don't shut off the wounds. There's a technique, a psychological technique called EMDR, using the memory to bring back the memory of the trauma and then relive it and then let it go. But the actual fact of reliving it acts as a healing function. So that's EMDR. If ever you want to go to a psychotherapist who practices that, it might be able to help you. I have a grandson who was deeply traumatized by an experience in hospital when he was 3 or 4. And this has made him phobic about having a blood transfusion. He just faints when he has that. And he's going to go to somebody to try and relive that trauma and free himself from it, because it can block up your life in many ways. It can inhibit your relationships with people because you don't want to experience any more trauma. So I think that that's very important, to recognize the trauma, to speak to it as if you were speaking to an individual, saying, I'm sorry that you're suffering so much, and can I help you? Tell me what I can do to help you. Make it more conscious. Don't leave it buried. Okay?
Thank you. And Esther has a good point in the chat that our next meeting is on the 23rd of April. And your next book coming out, Divine Wisdom and the Holy Spirit, will it be launched before the next meeting? Is there a
Yes,
chance?
it will. It's in the printers now. We're waiting for a proof copy next week. When we've said yes to the proof copy, it can go ahead, and it will then take 10 days to print at the maximum. So it should be well out before the next meeting, hopefully. And my publisher says I can at last get into my garden and plant some vegetables because I've been working so hard on this book, I couldn't do anything else. He's a lovely man. He's published 4 of my books now, and he understands absolutely where I'm coming from and what I'm writing about. So that is a blessing in itself, to find a publisher you can speak to about these things, who doesn't tell you, well, you can't have this and you can't have that because it might offend somebody. I don't know if I'll be sued by what I've said about some people and some things, but I don't care now. I shall just die shortly anyway, so I won't be bothered by any lawsuits. So I hope I've given you hope and trust in yourselves, and with this history behind you, that you have now the knowledge. I mean, you could show this video to people. You could show it to groups of men and women and just see what they say about it, and ask them, do you think we need a new image of God? Are you happy with the old image? Do you feel at ease with it? Do you feel it right that Jesus is called the only Son of God when he said that we were all children of God? You can ask questions. Any
Thank
more
you.
questions?
Any last questions? I also wanted to invite everyone, because so many of you are doing very interesting work. If you want to post anything in the chat, your website, if you have retreats coming up, if you have retreat spaces you want to offer for hire, if you've written something which is interesting perhaps to this group, or I know some of you are also hosting podcasts and webinar sessions, so please share in the chat if you'd like to share any of that. And yes, you will receive a link to the recording. And the next session is on the 23rd, and I'm just going to quickly paste again the registration for that in the chat. It's a separate registration, so I will put that here. You can click on that to register. And then finally, I've lost it, Anne's websites, which are way up at the top, and I'll put them in again. Oh, good. And people are sharing. Yes, do have a look at all of these. Some of you are wonderful coaches and consultants and have retreats coming up. And Anne, thank you very, very much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us. Especially, I know this has been a busy time with you getting the book ready. And we've had a lot of calls and going back and forth to prepare this. So thank you so much for all of that. And very specifically, I invited women to invite other women who are doing something in the world, who have some influence through their work, through their writing, through their leadership. And I very much hope that for all of us, we've taken some strands of wisdom here that can inform the work that we're doing in the world, the way we're doing it, and the messages that we're sharing with the world. So thank you, Anne, very much for that, and really for what you've done with a long life cultivating tremendous wisdom, particularly around the divine feminine, which is such a gift to all of us. And thank you for embodying that so much in yourself as well. And very much looking forward to the next session, where we'll be talking more about what do we do with this? How do we integrate this in our lives? Today was the historical overview, that we have this sort of understanding of where we are and how we got here. But then what's next? What do we do with that? So thank you all for engaging in this. And Anne, I'll just turn it back to you if you have any last comments, and looking forward to seeing you all on the 23rd of April, and I'll send the video out before then, and also the link when Anne's book comes out. I'll send it to everyone.
Well, really, I just have to thank you for making this possible, because there's no point being a writer unless you have an audience. So you give me an audience, and this is a beginning, because I hope to get out to many women. I hope that many people will buy the book and assimilate its contents, because there's a great deal in it, which is more than I can put in the talk. There's all the Essene teaching and the Gnostic teaching, things that we lost, but we could recover. And anyway, I'm very grateful to you, Sophie, for finding me. I'm not sure how you found me, but that you did, and that you've assimilated what I've been writing and the meaning of it and the importance of it. And I'm just very grateful that life has given me this opportunity of speaking and teaching and reaching women, because who so need help. Women need it very much, but so do men, because men have been stuck in this thing. They haven't been able to move from being trained to be warriors from 4,000 years. And they're still warriors in the technological sense. So they need help as much as women do. And particularly boys need it, because what social media is doing to both boys and girls is absolutely tragic. And the injuries they can inflict on each other at the age of 10 or 12 or 15 or whatever are really horrific. And something ought to be done about preventing a lot of the material that gets through to them. But governments are so slow because they don't want to interfere with freedom of speech. But it's high time that children's right to childhood is protected. So I think that's enough, and I'll think about more things to say next time, mainly in answer to questions, I think, because a lot comes out through questions. But I did want you to have this historical background, because unless women have that, they don't know what they're talking about when they're talking about the feminine. It's absolutely essential to know what's happened and why and how and when. So that, I hope, is what I've given you. So thank you all very much. And thanks, Sophie, for arranging it. I'll say goodbye now.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Sophie.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Wonderful, Sophie.
Oh, thank you. I'm just trying to, here, let me end.